chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash. Text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome to Farage. My name's Tom Harwood and I'm standing in for Nigel this evening. First tonight, the very latest on the horrific stabbing in north-east London. One 14-year-old boy is dead, 4 others remain in hospital. This shocking footage was released in the last hour, showing the moment the assailant was apprehended. We'll have the very latest. And a new constitution for the NHS, this time emphasising the importance of biological sex in the organisation. What will this mean for patient care when the services themselves are already stretched? We'll have that discussion. And the National Crime Agency has issued a warning to Britain's children. All teachers will be taught about the threat of sextortion to pupils across the country. This after the tragic suicide of a Scottish teenager. All that to come on the programme today, but first, your news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Tom, and good evening. Our top stories tonight. Video has emerged showing the moment that police arrested a man wielding a sword in north-east London. Officers cornered him at a property, bringing the suspect to the ground with 3 separate taser discharges. He's been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a 14-year-old boy. The 36-year-old suspect is now in hospital. Police say they've been unable to interview him due to his condition. 4 other people were injured, including 2 police officers. Earlier, Buckingham Palace said the King's thoughts and prayers are with all those affected. Assistant Commissioner Louisa Rolfe says the suspect was not known to them.
The 36-year-old man arrested at the scene is currently in hospital, having suffered injuries when his van collided with a building. He has been arrested on suspicion of murder. At this time, given his injuries, we have been unable to interview him. We know there is speculation about his background, including police contact with him. And despite urgent and extensive checks, today we have found no trace of a prior incident involving him so far.
A jealous ex-partner who killed a mother in front of her 2 young children has been handed a life sentence. 46-year-old Obert Moyo attacked 35-year-old Perseverance Nkub in her bedroom before chasing her into the street. Once there, he stabbed her through the heart with a meat skewer. He's been told that he must serve a minimum of 27 years. King Charles has revealed his shock at being diagnosed with cancer as he returned to official public duties for the first time since that diagnosis. He visited a cancer treatment centre alongside the Queen to meet medical specialists and patients. When asked about the state of his health, he said, "I'm well." The King has been announced as the new patron of Cancer Research UK, taking over from his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth. So Keir Starmer says the people of Scotland should be allowed to have a say on who becomes the next leader of the SNP. It's after a motion of no confidence in the Scottish Government was tabled by the Labour Party there. That will be debated and voted on tomorrow. Humza Yousaf announced that he was stepping down as First Minister on Monday, and he'll continue in his post until a replacement can be found. And finally, Donald Trump has been threatened with jail for violating a gag order in his hush money trial. Judge Juan Merchan fined the former president $9,000 and warned him that any further infractions could lead to incarceration. Merchan had imposed the gag order to prevent Mr. Trump from criticising witnesses and others. He was fined $1,000 for each of 9 online statements. Trump has argued that the gag order violates his right to freedom of speech. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Tom.
Good evening. You're watching Farage with me, Tom Harwood. Now, let's start tonight with that shocking stabbing in East London earlier today, where a 14-year-old boy has been tragically killed. Several people, including 2 police officers, were also attacked by the assailant, the man who was wielding a sword. Well, the Metropolitan Police have now confirmed that a suspect remains in custody in hospital after being tasered and arrested on suspicion of murder. Let's get the very latest from Mark White, our very own home and security editor. Mark, this was a shocking day in London.
Yes, it was, and that 36-year-old suspect, because of injuries that he sustained in that van, which collided with a house in Thurlow Gardens, just not far from that tube station.
Our whole community will be devastated by the heartbreaking news that a 14-year-old boy was killed in a horrific sword attack in Hainault this morning that saw 4 others injured, including 2 Metropolitan Police officers. I can't imagine what that poor boy's family are going through, and they have my deepest heartfelt condolences, and I know the thoughts and prayers not just of this community but our whole country. My prayers are also with the other victims of this horrific attack and their loved ones.
So that was the local MP, Wes Streeting there, just really talking about the impact that this has had on the local community. And you know, of course, Tom, just how very significant an incident is when you have the King talking about it, the Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition and other senior politicians all expressing their shock at what has happened, and also extending their thanks and gratitude and best wishes to those police officers who moved in to arrest this suspect. And we've seen that footage, very dramatic, released in the last hour of the moment this suspect was arrested, captured on a doorbell camera. It shows groups of police officers firing multiple taser shots to try to subdue this 36-year-old before eventually being able to get him to the ground and put the handcuffs on him. As I say, he has not been questioned as yet, but police have been making very urgent inquiries to determine whether they knew this individual, what the potential motivation might be. They have said so far they've not been able to find any record that they have had any interaction with this man before. And as for the motivation, clearly they don't know what his motivation is yet until they're able to speak to him. They will be searching his home address, probably other addresses linked to him and his family and friends, as they try to build a picture of what on earth it was that motivated him to carry out what prosecutors say, of course, was an absolutely horrific attack at 7 a.m. this morning in East London.
It was absolutely shocking, and in so many ways, so very unusual. But Mark, I put it to you that in one other way it perhaps wasn't so unusual, and that's this. London is experiencing an epidemic of knife crime. We've seen the statistics shoot up, particularly in the capital. And in some ways, this unusual incident just fits into that same repeated pattern.
Well, it does, because knife crime comes in many different forms. There is the street violence that we see time and again, involving usually young men carrying knives and using them to settle disputes, to coerce others. We see that. We see domestic incidents, and we see other attacks that are targeted or motivated by what we don't know. And this certainly falls into the wider category of knife crime, 22% up in London last year. And incidentally, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, wrote last month to the London Mayor about that rise in knife crime, those figures, saying that actually that 22% rise in knife crime in London skewed the figures for the whole country, because there would have been a slight decrease in knife crime across the country as a whole. But when you take into consideration 22% of a rise in London itself, it meant that there was a 5% increase across the country as a whole, Tom.
Mark White, that is an extraordinary statistic, that without London, knife crime would be falling across the country. But including London in those statistics, it actually means that knife crime on the whole is up. 22% rise, extraordinary statistics. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, thank you for giving us that overview. Well, I'm delighted to be now joined in the studio by Tony Long. He's a former Met Police Specialist Firearms Officer and instructor. And Tony, what struck me most about looking at that footage, that new footage, the doorbell footage, firstly, 7 officers are there to try and apprehend one suspect, and then a further 4 rush into the fray. So many officers to take down one suspect, and 22 minutes after they first received that call.
Well, yes, of course, it's, you know, we are in London, so there are more police officers, although if you speak to response officers, they'd probably be surprised to find that out, because there are so few of them on the ground. But one thing we are able to do in London is to get numbers to the scene quite quickly, because they're mobile. That said, of course, if you looked at that footage, I could only see 2 of the people that were obviously taser equipped. So most of the officers that were there trying to deal with him, trying to contain him. And I suspect the reason it took so long is because, you know, to get close enough to contain him, you know, you're going to be within striking distance of him. And even a taser, although you've got some distance between you, it takes very little time for an aggressive person armed with an edged weapon to actually close that gap on you. And so they would have been hesitant, they would have been trying to block off his escapes, they would have been trying to keep the public away. Of course, nowadays, you know, biggest part of the problem is keeping people with their phones out from trying to take pictures of it. So it's a very difficult situation to deal with.
A hugely difficult situation. One of the most striking things here is that 2 of the 5 people that ended up in hospital, one, of course, sadly died, 2 were police officers who received serious injuries that required surgery in hospital today. People have been asking, should these officers themselves be better protected? Some of them only have batons, few of them have tasers, even fewer still firearms. Now, as an ex-firearms officer yourself, what's your view on the utility of more police officers having that capability?
I'm very torn on this. I think purely from a moral standpoint, I think it says something about a society that are prepared to pay the salaries of men and women to protect them, but then don't give them the equipment to protect themselves. So, you know, I hear it all the time, I wouldn't really like to see British police officers armed. Well, I'm sure you wouldn't, but are you going to do their job unarmed? Because I certainly wouldn't want to do it in this day and age without a handgun. I spent 25 of my 30 years as part of an armed team, and so therefore I had the privilege, and some would say the luxury of carrying a firearm. But the vast majority of officers don't have that. A good percentage wouldn't want to.
Well, this is what I was going to come on to, because there have been surveys of serving police officers, and I found it perhaps quite surprising that so many have said they don't want to use firearms, but also reports of firearms officers now handing back their weapons.
Well, so it's interesting you should say that, because whenever there has been a survey, rather in the same way that you were surprised by London's knife crime statistics skewing the whole country, when the Police Federation have done these surveys in the past, they've been done across the whole country. And of course, a huge amount of officers don't feel the need for, if you're working in a predominantly rural area, you've never found the need to go it. But I guarantee if you ask some of the young officers that you see responding to that situation, whether or not they would like to be better prepared, then I think some would. That said, that what you've just pointed out, the way in which police officers are treated after they've been involved in a situation where they've had to resort to their training, this has come to a light recently. We've got a trial that we're all awaiting the outcome of with the officer that shot Chris Cabba. And yes, I mean, normally SO19 or MO19, which is the Central Firearms Command, that not only train every firearms officer in the Met, but also supply the armed response vehicle, the specialist firearms teams. Normally, on a typical year, they'll get something in the region of about 250 applicants when they ask people to apply. Six, that's all they've got. And also, there's a lot of officers who are armed, who are trying to get out of frontline proactive armed policing to go to safer, what they perceive to be safer roles, such as close protection.
And this is partly because of how we treat our police officers who have had to fire their weapons. Just lastly, if you would, I know that you have had a pretty torrid time of it, being raked through the system after you shot and killed an armed assailant.
Yeah. So I shot someone rather foolishly, I suppose, literally about 100 days before I was due to retire at the end of my 30 years service. And then I faced a criminal charge of murder at the Old Bailey 10 years after. So 7 years after I'd retired and 10 years after the incident. That's not typical, but investigations that don't necessarily result in charges. I mean, I can think of 2 officers specifically now whose investigation took something in the region of 6 years. When they went to court, the Crown Prosecution Service offered no evidence, and now they're awaiting gross misconduct things when the judge actually commended them at court for their courage. And now they're awaiting, misconduct things. So the way in which officers are treated, it always almost seems to me that certain politicians, and certainly the IOPC as a whole, seem to think that if a police officer discharges their firearm, they have in some way done something wrong, simply by virtue of the fact that they've pulled the trigger. No police officer wants to pull the trigger. It's one of those things that you train to do, that you hope you will never have to do. But people forget that they've been trained to do that. Yeah. And it seems that, it seems completely perverse.
And it can hang over their heads, or if it hung over your head for 10 years before that was brought. It
hasn't affected me. No. I'm all right there.
Well, Tony Long, thank you so much for coming in, sharing your story, but also commenting on this this really horrific event in London today. I should mention that you were also the author of a book, Lethal Force, all about this subject. Highly, highly recommended. Now, coming up, we're going to be talking about the NHS and its constitution. Yes, a proposed reform to the constitution of the NHS to talk about biological sex. We'll be diving into that next.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
J.K. Rowling has accused politicians of snuggling up to trans campaigners. The Harry Potter author has called for an investigation into why political parties are embracing the language of pro-trans groups. So is it time to ditch campaign groups such as those? Well, welcome again to my clashers, former Labour Party advisor Matthew Laza, and also businessman and activist Adam Brooks.
I think the Cass report is really welcome. I think there's been a huge amount of agreement, including from some trans rights campaigners, that there's an awful lot of good in the Cass report. I think that I'm more concerned about mermaids, which is currently under a Charity Commission investigation, and some of the reports, if they're to be believed, like sending out chest binders, are more alarming. I think on Stonewall, which has done such great work over the past 30 years on LGBT rights.
It said 2-year-olds could be trans. Now, that is one of the most horrifying things I read today. Actually, J.K. Rowling tweeted that out there. To say that a 2-year-old can think that they can be another gender when my 4-year-old still thinks she's Elsa on some days. You know, there's no common sense, and to me it's
very badly phrased.
It's very sinister that these people actually believe that these kids want to change gender, and unfortunately out there are parents that almost see a trans kid as a fashion accessory now, and I think this whole agenda has pushed on people that this is normal to change gender, and we have to push back. And as I said earlier, to be trans is not normal.
Well, I don't agree with that
extreme.
phrasing. I think it's a big step, Adam, but there are clearly people throughout history who have been
But it's
trans.
not normal behaviour, is it?
I think as far as children are concerned, children need to be given the space to explore the world, and that can include experimenting with, breaking previous gender stereotypes. That doesn't mean that people should be sort of labelled at the age of 2, which I completely disagree with.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 20 minutes past 7 and you're watching and listening to Farage with me, Tom Harwood. Now, did you know that the NHS has a constitution? Well, it does, and the constitution provides various rights for patients, people who use the NHS. In 2010, this was updated to include the importance of the ability of people within the NHS, patients, to choose whether they're on a male or female ward. This was a sex-based right that was introduced to the NHS. But now it's being updated and the language is being changed, but not in the way that language is usually changed when it comes to our health service. No, it's being changed to include the importance of what the government call biological sex. So instead of the sort of pamphlets that we've seen often in emphasising the importance of something called chest feeding rather than breastfeeding, no, this is language going back in the other direction. At least that's the proposal for the constitution of the NHS. But let's talk through it now. I'm joined by Sharon Davies, the women's rights campaigner and former Olympic Games swimmer. Sharon, thank you for making the time this evening. Usually when we see language being updated in documents to do with the NHS, it's going in the other direction.
It depends on what you call the other direction. I think this is all about fact and truth. So the front page of the Telegraph today says that biological sex is a fact. Now, biological sex is a fact. You know, there are only male and females. There are only two gametes, a large and a small, and human beings cannot change their sex. So it's not kind to anybody to tell young children in particular that that isn't the case. So I think we just have to be honest. And in things like medicine, where it's really important that we are checking a male for prostate cancer and we're checking a female for cervical or ovarian cancer, that we know that, you know, what sex people actually are. And then obviously in something like sport, you know, you mentioned that I'm a feminist campaigner. I'm really just a sports campaigner. You know, I've really just been on board with regards to trying to get the equal opportunities for people that are female in sport to the same opportunities that males have. And obviously in a physical activity like sport, it's really important that we can categorise that by sex. And so therefore we have female races so that 51% of the world's population get to have those opportunities.
Now, there will be those that say that this is a very, very minor issue that the government is sort of press releasing and promoting today, that it affects such a small proportion of people in the country. In the census that was carried out in England and Wales very recently, just 0.1% of the public reported that they were transgender female. Just 0.1% reported that they were transgender male. Should we really be spending so much time focusing on something that really affects so very few people?
I think what you've just said is unbelievably disingenuous. You know, I'm sorry, you've just said that only the trans people matter. 51% of the population in this country are female, and women's rights at the moment have been under attack constantly, whether that's with regards to dignity and safe spaces, whether that's with regards to the loss of their language. I mean, it's insulting to be called a chest feeder or a cervix haver. I mean, and this didn't happen to men. It only happened to women. It was only women's languages that was attacked. So I'm sorry, Tom, that's unbelievably disingenuous to say that only affects a small number of people. It affects a huge number of women, how they are referred to and whether they get equal opportunities and dignity and safety in their private spaces. So no, absolutely not. Let's move forward, and we need more often.
You're right that when it comes to ridiculous language like chest feeding, that is palpably nonsense. But that hasn't necessarily been the forefront of any of this conversation. But perhaps what would matter more would be a government to focus on the 44,000 cases last year of women and men being forced to be in mixed-sexed wards, which was meant to be out of the rules, which was meant to be outruled in 2010, but because of the pressures that the NHS is under, those rules are routinely being broken, irrespective of anything to do with transgender people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and this comes down to safety, because we know figures-wise, you know, the sexual offences, 98% are by men, are by males, OK? So it's females that need that protected space. You're right. I mean, the NHS is under unbelievable stress and strain in every single direction. But I think women are quite frightened at the moment and quite scared when they go into those sort of places. They can't say, please, I would like, you know, a female doctor. I would like a female carer. You know, I know of horrendous stories of disability, people who have been physically and verbally assaulted because they've just said, I would like a female to tend to me, please. And that we've got to be able to have this open, respectful debate for both sides, for everybody. You know, everybody needs to be thought of and be kind to. But for a long time, I think women have just been literally the ones that are supposed to succumb, and no one is thinking about being kind to them. And I can tell you in sport, no one is being kind to the women. We're just being told we're not entitled to what the men have still got. Just today in the States, there was a bunch of 5 girls that were throwing the shot put in West Virginia, and they decided to say that we're not going to throw the shot put because they've just introduced a 14-year-old boy who wanted to throw the shot put. And instead of saying, OK, well, we'll remove the boy, they banned the 5 girls from the women's category of shot put. You know, I mean, it's outrageous. I don't know what girls are supposed to do. Are we just supposed to say we don't matter, you know, and just move over?
I think you're right. I think you're right that in the United States there are some extreme examples of this going very, very wrong, some exclusionary examples of this. But to return to the United Kingdom...
That's not true. So here in the UK, there's still 57 sports that don't protect the female category, and we still have 5 combat sports. That's sports, fighting sports, that don't protect the female category.
Can we return to the NHS? Because I want to focus on this issue that is being changed today, or being proposed to be changed today, that the word biological will be added into this right for sex-selective care. Is that actually a change to what is being offered? Will that actually be treated as a change?
I think we've had to add this word biological because sex has been hijacked. So it's the same with the Equality Act of 2010. You know, the word sex is protected so we can have sex discrimination court cases and women can be protected. But that word has been muzzled and sabotaged. So to bring the word back to biological sex, it means that everyone understands exactly what that is. That's the biological reality of males and females. And if that's what we need to do to bring clarity, then that's what we need to do. And I'm very pleased that we've had this move today. I'm very pleased that the Cash report has come out, that we're actually being able to look at statistics and we'll be able to say we need to take care of our vulnerable young children who are being potentially influenced by something which they're being sold a lie. They've been sold a quick fix, which in the long term is not going to do them any good. And, you know, we can see by the number of autistic children, the number of children from vulnerable backgrounds, that they're massively, overrepresented in the trans community. So that's not normal. There's alarm bells that need to be rung there. We need to make sure that we're just proper precautions. That's all.
Of course, and the Cass review does set out that there are various areas of concern, but it also does say that there are various areas that are totally legitimate. And I think that perhaps the Cass review here is striking the right balance that some on both sides of this debate tend to often not strike, that doesn't respect the rights of both camps here. Perhaps the Cass review actually is a path forward that can bring people together.
I hope so. I think what we've not been able to do for quite a long time is to have that open, respectful, factual debate. Because for a long time, Stonewall's agenda was to close that down with the no debate, agenda that they had. And that certainly applied to sport. The moment you said, come and we look at the stats, can we look at the peer-reviewed science? We literally were just called names, and it made anyone's life horrendous who wanted just to say, can we have fairness and honesty? So I think we've got to move forward where we can be 100% honest and we can try to help everybody. And, that's young females, that's sports people, that's transgender people. That's all of us. We can live together. We should be able to live together, and I'm sure we can.
Well, that's a harmonious note to end on. Sharon Davies, thank you very much for joining us, former Olympic Games swimmer there. Now, coming up on the programme, we're going to move to Wales. Yes, it's not just the First Minister of Scotland who's been under the microscope in the last 14 days, leading to his resignation, of course, but the First Minister of Wales is now under the microscope too. It all centres around 2 donations, each worth £100,000. And get this, they're donations from a convicted criminal. We'll be getting to that story after this.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Good evening to you. A different day tomorrow. In the east, we'll have much more cloud compared to today, whereas in the west, it should be a little brighter. Still some wet weather around, though, across parts of Wales and southwest England this evening, affecting the West Midlands too. That showery rain working into southwest Scotland. At the same time, a few showers coming into eastern England, particularly Norfolk, Suffolk and up towards Lincolnshire. Many other areas, though, will be dry. Quite a mild night. Temperatures in some towns and cities staying in double digits. On to Wednesday, and a very different day across the northeast of England and eastern Scotland. Much more cloud around. There will be some rain at times here as well, particularly across the far northeast through the late morning into the early afternoon. A much brighter day there for Wales and southwest England. We'll see some sunny spells for Northern Ireland and particularly western Scotland. 18 degrees likely here, and further south with a bit of brightness we might get close to 20 Celsius. But in the south late on, look at this, some heavy rain working up from France, and we could well see some big downpours and some thunderstorms, particularly through the early hours of Thursday morning across southern England, maybe the Midlands and parts of South Wales. So some rumbles of thunder, some flashes of lightning. They'll be clearing away during Thursday morning, but still staying cloudy with some showers in the south on Thursday. Many places elsewhere seeing some good spells of sunshine, but cool and cloudy on some of these North Sea coasts. But in the sunshine, 20 degrees possible in western Scotland.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs Live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday,
The people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday at midnight on GB News.
Good evening, it's 33 minutes past 7 and you're watching Farage with me, Tom Harwood. Now, we're going to turn our attention to Wales, because it's not just Scotland that it's experiencing wobbles in its leadership. Of course, the First Minister of Scotland resigned sensationally on Monday. But now, perhaps, United Kingdom attention will be turning to another country in our union. That is Wales, where the First Minister, Vaughan Gething, he's been in the job around 6 weeks. But already huge scrutiny is being applied to 2 donations that he received from a convicted criminal, each worth £100,000. Now, let's get straight into the detail with Martin Shipman. Now, he's the associate editor of Nation Cymru, and he broke the original story about what is going on here. Now, can you just break down for us? Because it's quite a complicated story. What is the charge being levied against the First Minister?
Well, I was tipped off a few days after the ballot had opened for the Welsh Labour leadership contest that these donations had been made to Mr Gething. And in fact, they appeared on the Electoral Commission's website. But I was also tipped off that the individual who owns the relevant company that had made the donations had been convicted some years ago for 2 quite serious environmental offences, and indeed they were regarded as so serious that he got suspended prison sentences on both occasions. And what he was doing basically was dumping toxic sludge in a site of special scientific interest, which is called the Gwent Levels, which is near Newport in South Wales. And ironically, it's quite a totemic area for the Welsh Government, because they made a big thing about stopping the M4 relief road going through this particular area. And then you've got a situation where the businessman who is giving money to the, as he became First Minister and Welsh Labour leader, is actually dumping toxic sludge in defiance of the law in this area. There's been a lot of very serious concern, not only amongst opposition politicians in Wales, but also it's the case that a lot of Labour people are very upset about this as well, because Mr Gething only had the support of the minority of the members of the Labour group in the Senate of the Welsh Parliament anyway. And when this came out, they were extremely upset about it. It later came to light, and I was tipped off about this as well, that the company that had given the donation to him, in fact, owes £400,000 to the Development Bank of Wales, which is wholly owned by the Welsh Government. And before becoming elected as the First Minister, Mr Gething was the Economy Minister, so he had responsibility for that bank. So obviously people are saying, look, this just looks so bad and so appalling. So there's been a lot of anxiety in Wales about this, and I've written quite a lot of stories about it. And in fact, tomorrow in the Senedd, Plaid Cymru have got a debate where they are wanting there to be caps on the donations given to individual politicians. But it's something that hasn't really got the attention which I think it deserves on a UK-wide basis. And I think it's a good thing.
We're bringing some light to this now. But Martin, just to set out the facts, Vaughan Gething, as Economy Minister, presided over a bank that gave £400,000 to this company. This company led by a bloke who's been given 2 suspended sentences for this sludge dumping. And then that same bloke gives £200,000 to Vaughan Gething, and Vaughan Gething then becomes the First Minister of Wales. What does Vaughan Gething himself say to... Because I suppose those are all incontrovertible facts.
Well, the incontrovertible facts, all he says, really, whenever he's asked about this, is that he hasn't broken any rules. There was a move to refer him under the ministerial code to the previous First Minister, Mark Drakeford. Mark Drakeford had advice from his officials that technically Vaughan Gething had not broken the ministerial code, and therefore there wasn't anything to do about that. Complaints have been made to the Standards Commissioner. The Standards Commissioner has refused to investigate it fully. And so, people have come up against a bit of a brick wall, but there's an awful lot of unhappiness in the Senedd about this, but it goes wider than that, because whenever there's a story done, there's an awful lot of comments coming from ordinary people in Wales about this. And so it's bringing not just Mr. Gething into disrepute, it's bringing the Labour Party into disrepute, but it's also bringing the entire institution into disrepute. People are saying, well, how on earth can this be the case, that this is regarded as okay to accept such a huge amount of money from a criminal? And incidentally, Mr. Gething had previously been involved in effectively lobbying the environmental regulator, Natural Resources Wales, on behalf of this criminal, saying, go easy on him.
This is what I wanted to come on to, because doesn't this company want some permissions that the Welsh Government can grant? There's a lot of controversy over this.
There is. Well, they want to build a big solar plant, which would be attached to the national grid and would obviously make a lot of money for this company. But that has to be approved by the Welsh Government. And who's in charge of the Welsh Government? Vaughan Gething.
Curious and curious. I'm afraid, Martin, that's all we have time for. But thank you very much for joining us. Of course, Vaughan Gething denies any wrongdoing here, but there are serious questions to answer, no doubt. That, of course, was Martin Shipman, Associate Editor of Nation Cymru. Now it's time for What the Farage. And today we're talking missing migrants. Because thousands of migrants earmarked to be on those first planes to Rwanda, well, they've gone missing. They're not turning up on the government's registers. They're not clocking in to see those Home Office officials that they're supposed to each week or every several weeks. Now, what on earth might have happened to these people? And might the government have made a bit of an error here in terms of earmarking the people, saying, you're going to Rwanda, but then not doing anything to track them down? Might these migrants have gone missing? And more pertinently, where might these migrants have gone missing to? Because, of course, it was the Irish Deputy Prime Minister, Michael Martin, who was saying the Rwanda scheme is making Ireland the home to many thousands more migrants than otherwise would be the case. He said the Rwanda scheme is the UK government is almost pushing migrants to Dublin. We can see on our screens here the scenes in Dublin, this tent city that has popped up with so many more migrants now in Ireland, perhaps, well, at least according to the Irish government, trying to escape the Rwanda scheme. But is the Irish government right when they say that? We here at Farage have been looking at the data. I want to show you this graph. It's the level of asylum applications in Ireland, measured by the thousands. You can see it by year. Relatively stable for many years, but when does it shoot up? 2022 and 2023, measured in thousands, so many more thousands, over 13,000 asylum applications in Ireland. Well, that's before the Rwanda scheme got passed through Parliament. And here's just one more graph to show the scale of what's going on in Ireland, perhaps why the Irish government might want to blame the Brits for their migration troubles. This year, the number of asylum applications in Ireland could be 4 times the number in the UK per person. 4 times the scale, and tents across Dublin. It's a growing political issue there. No wonder they're blaming the Brits. Now, another issue that, of course, we'll be covering here on Farage next. The case of sextortion. The National Crime Agency has issued a warning to all schools across the country about this dangerous crime. What is it about? We'll tell you all the details after this.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the quaint Derbyshire village of Sudbury, there's a storm brewing between the local football club and the National Trust. This grass field might seem unremarkable, but for hundreds of years it's been part of the Sudbury Hall estate, playing host to the village football and cricket matches. Now the National Trust are planning to put an end to that tradition in the name of biodiversity, with plans for trees and plants where the football club play. Some worry it breaks a memorandum of wishes from the late Lord Vernon, whose family have lived here since 1660. Manager of Sudbury FC Tom Crutchley says he's upset at the decision.
Naturally disappointed. We've been here, this is our 9th year. We've put a lot of effort into here to keep playing, to maintain it. I'm from the village originally, so personally it was it is very upsetting.
MP for Derbyshire Dales Sarah Dines says the National Trust aren't respecting the history of the site.
I feel they're trampling over the wishes of historic owners who gave up this wonderful site for the nation. And for over 100 years people have played football and cricket here. It's incredibly sad. Incredibly sad, and it's against the wishes of a lot of people locally who've written to me from the village.
Sudbury Hall lives under the branding of the Children's Country House, a decision which Dines says is disrespectful to the history of the estate.
I mean, this is fake to make it into a children's theme park. It's almost a reimagining, and in fact that's the very words it says on their website. The house is reopened, it's been reimagined. I don't want our heritage to be reimagined. I think the National Trust has been captured by people who have different ideas than most people in this country.
Whilst the public will still be able to roam these historic grounds, the village feels like a legacy is being snatched away. Jack Carson, GB News, Sudbury.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good evening, it's 7:45 and you're watching Farage with me, Tom Harwood. Now, the National Crime Agency has sent what's being described as an unprecedented alert to teachers across the country after cases of what is known as sextortion. That's when people, often teenagers, often children, are tricked into sending intimate photographs of themselves to people posing as interested partners, but who turn out to be criminals, often based overseas. Then extorted with threats that their photographs will be shared. Well, let's first talk to Sean Sutton, the Head of Education and Partnerships team at the National Crime Agency. Sean, just how prevalent is this issue?
Well, we are seeing a significant increase in this particular type of crime, which is why we've taken that unprecedented step of sending out an NCA alert to all education establishments across the UK. It's risen by about 149% from NECMEC, the National Centre of Missing and Exploited Children, have given us those figures from 22 to 23. And it's a particularly insidious crime. We are used to dealing with crime types against young girls and women, typically online. Tends to be the sexually motivated casework, tends to be predominantly female. This, because it's financially motivated sexual extortion, we're seeing that the target group are young boys. Typically, we see it from our work between the ages of 14 to 18, but they do target young men as well, up to the age of 30 is the typical band that we're seeing. They're very quickly engaging their potential victims with communication that very fast becomes intimate. These images, these profiles, if you like, tend to be either fake, that the criminals have created, or you may recognise the female profiles that they're using because they may have been hacked. So you may think you know these individuals, but the important thing is you won't recognise the characteristic of how they're speaking to you. As I said, very quickly become intimate. They'll try and get an intimate picture from their victims by first potentially increasing their trust and sending a picture of what is alleged to be them, but of course is a fake female profile. And then as soon as they get that information, they very quickly manipulate their victim into sending them money with the threat that they'll release those intimate pictures or a faked intimate picture that they'll pretend to have of you to your friends and family.
Sean, what should people do if they're concerned?
Well, I think the first step is to know that it's a threat in the first place and to understand what that looks like. So if you do get that approach from a profile you don't know and it very quickly tries to take you from the platform you've met on, say if it was Instagram or Facebook, they may try and take you off to somewhere private to message saying, let's have some fun. Our recommendation would be never to do that with somebody that you don't know, or a profile that isn't acting as you would normally expect them to, so refuse to come off the platform. And also, we're telling parents as well as teachers to try and raise the awareness with their own children, because these offenders try to keep their power base by saying you can't share this with your parents, you can't share this, it's embarrassing, I'm going to tell all your friends, your life will be over. So what we're trying to get parents and teachers is to be more open about these potential crimes so that it takes the sting out of the tail. So what we're saying is do tell somebody. If you can't tell the police, if you can't tell a teacher, tell an adult you trust, even tell a friend. What we're trying to tell people is you're not alone. You're not the only person that will have fallen for these. Hundreds of other people have too.
Yeah, well, Sean, thank you so much for talking us through this serious and growing problem. It really, really is serious. Sean Sutton, Head of Education Partnerships at the National Crime Agency, thank you. Well, joining me in the studio now is Christine Cunliffe, the Principal of LVS Ascot, an independent school. And this is such a difficult issue because children have died because of this. There's been the most recent tragic case of a Scottish boy committing suicide after this issue.
Absolutely, and the word insidious, it is probably one of the most evil things I think you could do to anyone, never mind a child. And I think it is the key issue here is to talk to your children so that it's never seen as something that you can't talk about, and that any problem in life, you should share with an adult as well, because these things are going on and it is getting worse. And it is probably something that all parents need to understand can happen very easily to any of their children.
And this is happening more and more to teenage boys. How do you approach this as a head teacher? How do you approach this with your pupils?
Well, I think it is. I think with our pupils, we're very open and transparent in our community. And I've got sons myself. And I think it's having those questions and having those conversations where it's not embarrassing to talk about it. And so young men especially will be looking for relationships. They'll be looking for that special relationship. And often the person they're talking to is not who they think it is. And that's where the danger is. And my advice would be, whatever, doesn't matter what the relationship, do not send any images of any kind like that anyway, because once they're out there for good and they could be used now or in the future. And to talk to your parents, talk to your teachers about how you can have those talking relationships, invite someone to be with your family, for example, come and meet me for coffee. My mum and dad will probably be sat in a car down the road, but to have those normal relationships away from being online.
Is there a risk here that it's so normalised for particularly teenagers, particularly teenage boys, to engage in what's known as sexting? That almost an abstinence policy it might fall on deaf ears.
And that's the thing, because all schools have very good online training, and all the education materials are out there, and all the warnings are out there, and teachers are well trained as well. But it's like with anything with young people, sometimes it falls on deaf ears and they probably don't realise the absolute dangers of it. And I think once you fall into that trap and once you're in there, you feel that you're on your own and you feel that there's no way out when there is. So my advice is just tell someone, just be brave, tell someone that you're in trouble and it can be sorted out, and these people should be held to task.
Well, Christine, kind of really important advice there for parents, for anyone who knows any young person, because it is a dangerous world out there. Well, coming up next, we're going to be talking to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Because, Jacob, you have a programme on next, State of the Nation. What is the State of the Nation?
The State of the Nation, well, we're going to be talking beginning about Claire Coutinho's important speech saying that net zero isn't going to be about setting rigid targets that ruin the economy. And this is really important because it's such a big change. All we've had to date are rigid targets that will and have been damaging the economy. The Secretary of State has changed that. And I think this opens up an important political divide. It's very good ground for the Conservatives to get onto, saying let's actually have cheap energy in a growing economy, leaving the Labour Party to carry on with this hair shirt lark.
Well, the words come cheap, don't they? But the government still does have rigid targets. It might have moved some of them from 2030 to 2035, but that remains a target, does it?
Yeah, I'd move them to 2135 if it were up to me, but I agree we need to go further. But this is a big statement of intent. It builds on what the Prime Minister said last year in September, which moved back some of the targets. The boiler tax has been delayed for a year. I think this needs to go further, but it's a really important start.
Does this tie in at all to what's happened in Scotland in the last couple of days? Of course, it was the shifting of targets that were, well, the Scottish Government described them as ambitious, others might describe them as punitive, that really led to the failure and the downfall of the First Minister.
This is really important, that people were all in favour of green targets when the economy was booming and they felt well off. As soon as there was a cost of living problem and energy prices went shooting up, suddenly people thought, I don't want to be cold and poor. And the policies that we have adopted have set targets for some years in the future. Every time they get closer, people abandon them because nobody wins elections by beating up their own voters. That's what the SNP realised when it abandoned its targets. The Greens exist to manufacture hair shirts. I mean, they are the hair shirt manufacturers of Britain and wish to be an exporting business. The Conservatives have always been in allowing people choice over their own lives. And Claire Coutinho has also been advocating technological solutions and recognising that they will take time to develop. And most importantly, she said that people will carry on using more energy rather than less, which is just a practical reality of economics.
Well, there we go. Jacob Rees-Mogg up next. That's been it for me on Farage. Stick around, though, because it's an important debate coming up.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Good evening to you. A different day tomorrow. In the east, we'll have much more cloud compared to today, whereas in the west, it should be a little brighter. Still some wet weather around, though, across parts of Wales and southwest England this evening, affecting the West Midlands too. That showery rain working into southwest Scotland. At the same time, a few showers coming into eastern England, particularly Norfolk, Suffolk and up towards Lincolnshire. Many other areas, though, will be dry. Quite a mild night. Temperatures in some towns and cities staying in double digits. On to Wednesday, and a very different day across the northeast of England and eastern Scotland. Much more cloud around. There will be some rain at times here as well, particularly across the far northeast through the late morning into the early afternoon. A much brighter day there for Wales and southwest England. We'll see some sunny spells for Northern Ireland and particularly western Scotland. 18 degrees likely here, and further south with a bit of brightness we might get close to 20 Celsius. But in the south late on, look at this, some heavy rain working up from France, and we could well see some big downpours and some thunderstorms, particularly through the early hours of Thursday morning across southern England, maybe the Midlands and parts of South Wales. So some rumbles of thunder, some flashes of lightning. They'll be clearing away during Thursday morning, but still staying cloudy with some showers in the south on Thursday. Many places elsewhere seeing some good spells of sunshine, but cool and cloudy on some of these North Sea coasts. But in the sunshine, 20 degrees possible in western Scotland.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
I'm slipping neck. Oh dear.
Oh
my God, are you joking?
You're joking. Really? Seriously, it's not a wine. What is it?
Oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you.
The next winning call could be answered by you. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at GB